friends ever since.
Today I'm going to be talking about the OPZ, and this is not a video I expected myself to be doing anytime soon, not least because I got an OP1 not that long ago and I thought that the OP1 had maybe scratched my portable music making requirements, but here we are. I had become intrigued by what people were doing with these things when I saw them online in jams and stuff like that, and even though, to be honest, I wasn't particularly even interested in the OPZ at all, partly because, you know, it has no screen and trying to remember all these wee button combinations seemed like a nightmare. I came across one secondhand for a good price, and it just so happened that I had sold off some old camera gear, which was the exact same price as the OPZ secondhand. I think I paid like 300 and something pounds, and I think they retail for 500 odd, so I decided just to reinvest the money and try it out for myself, and so that's what this video is going to be looking at. There's quite a lot to be said about the OPZ, and I've put off doing this video for a while because of that, because I didn't quite know how to fit everything in a video that people would actually want to watch and which wouldn't go on for hours and which I couldn't be arsed editing. So I'm going to break it down into kind of sections where I talk about the build quality and form factor, because that's one of the kind of important integral things to the OPZ. I'm going to talk about the things that I think are great about it. I'm going to talk about the things that are not so great, and then I'm going to talk about kind of my experience and usability after having had it for a few weeks. One caveat straight away, I am from Scotland in case you hadn't noticed with my accent, and because of that I do say OPZ, although because of American colonialism and cultural imperialism I also say OPZ sometimes, and honestly I don't know why or what the rhyme or reason is, but you should be aware of it, and don't tell me about it. What I'm going to do at this stage is take you over to another table over there somewhere, and I'll show you the build a bit closer up so you can kind of see what I'm talking about rather than it being an abstract thing with this in front of my face. So here we go, build quality. Okay, we obviously have to talk about the physical embodiment of the OPZ because that is one of its most interesting and kind of unique or striking features. As you can see, it's a wee tiny thing, but it's hard to get an idea of scale if you don't have anything to compare it to. So here is my TV remote control, and as you can see, it's basically the same size, although the OPZ is considerably thinner. But maybe that's not helpful because you don't know what size my TV control is. So I'll use my Volca standard of measurement. This is my trademarked way of measuring things. And whilst I can't fit them both on the screen perfectly, you can see that the OPZ is basically the same length or the same width, is that? Either way, it's the same size-ish that way as the Volca, maybe a wee bit bigger, but it's about exactly 2 Volcas high, or 1 Volca high, sorry, there's 2 OPZs in 1 Volca. Obviously, again, the thickness of the OPZ versus the Volca is quite different. But it really truly is a wee tiny beast, and it's even narrower than the pocket operators in terms of this way, which is quite amazing. So if you thought the OP1 was portable, this thing truly blows it away. It is truly tiny. You'll notice that there are no knobs on this, or at least the knobs are these kind of like mini DJ deck style things rather than some kind of protruding knob. And whilst you might be unsure of these at first, they're actually very nice to use, very pleasant to use. And you can get wee plug-in things that people have made to turn them into proper knobs if that's what you want to do, but I don't really see why you would do that because I don't see what benefit you get from using regular knobs. The buttons are nice and clicky. I've seen people talk about them as if they're mechanical keyboard buttons, but honestly, or mechanical keyboard keys, sorry, but as a bit of a mechanical keyboard snob, that's not the case. They're just nice and tactile. They remind me of Smarties actually, although I don't know if you have Smarties in America, but they've just got a definite satisfying press to them. The actual OPZ itself is plastic. It's got a weird kind of plastic though that is kind of like cardboard, and I don't mean that in like a derogatory way. It's just got like a, I don't quite know how to explain it. Maybe it's just that it's very boxy, and the edges are actually quite sharp, which isn't the best thing when you're you're meant to hold it like this. So it's not the most comfortable device to hold, but it's not something I think about, to be honest, too often. I should say that it doesn't feel like cheap crap because, well, it's not cheap, but it's also not massively premium feeling either. In all honesty, the build isn't something that I've really thought about much since I started using it. You notice it at first and then it just kind of becomes part of the device, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. The surface on this is a bit strange in the sense that it's kind of a mottled grey colour, and it'll be quite hard to see, I guess, on this screen, but you can see it's got kind of markings on it, and this is something that when you see these online or for sale, you kind of assume that they're quite dirty or grubby, but it's not the case. It's actually because the plastic has this natural, or I guess what I assume is natural, marbling to it, and it doesn't look the best. In person it's fine, but maybe you know, a matte colour or even a glossy colour would have been a bit better. It's just quite strange. It's not what you expect. For a quick explanation of how the OPZ works, if you're not familiar, we have 16 tracks up here, and then we have a keyboard style thing down here. Each button also has a kind of secondary function which you access using shift. There are only 8 audio tracks. The other tracks are for effects and things like that, like controlling the display. We have our transport down here. You select your track using this wee track button here. I'm not going to show you each individual track or even let you hear them because this isn't a sound demo, but you get the idea. We have kick drum, I guess that's meant to be snare, hi-hat, sample, a bass, what is that, lead, arp and chord. And some of these are, this is kind of similar in architecture to the pocket operators, where if you know the PO33, some of them are one-shot samples like the drum tracks, and some of them are pitched like the keyboard. As far as I can tell though, unlike the pocket operators, there aren't really any limits to the number of sounds you can stack up on an individual track, so you can keep stacking things up. There might be a limit, but I haven't found it yet. You switch between your patterns by holding down this pattern button and selecting them. There's also 10 different projects here, 1 through to 10, so you can have 10 different projects, each with 16 patterns. But I'm not going to tell you about all the features, that's just my very quick run through. Okay, now you know a wee bit about how the OPZ works and how the build quality is and all that kind of thing. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I really like about the OPZ and which stand out as strengths for me. The first big one is the portability, and by that I don't just mean the size and weight of the thing, because if that's all we're talking about then obviously it would be portable. But I think when talking about portability, there are lots of variables or lots of factors that go into making that kind of determination, as in it's not just the size and weight that makes the decision on whether you're going to take it out the house or not. Now, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, if we take the OP1, I got the OP1 largely because of its supposed portability. And yes, in one respect, it is tiny and it is fully feature packed. And so it's a great portable music making device. But what I've discovered is that I don't actually take it out and about all that often. And part of the reason is that it's bloody expensive, and because of that you begin to worry about it a wee bit, especially because the knobs protrude from the actual thing itself, and so you begin to be like, well, I've spent over $1,000 on this thing and I don't want it to get wrecked. And you see people online like casually slinging their OP1 into their backpack before they go for a wee day hiking or skateboarding or climbing a mountain or surfing a bloody wave or something. And if you actually did that in practice with the OP1, it wouldn't last more than a week. So I don't really know what they're smoking, but for me that just wasn't an option. So what you do, of course, is you get a hard case like this, and you go, cool, that'll protect the OP1, and you put the OP1 in there, and then that's it. Right, now instantly this makes it bulkier, and if you've got hand luggage trying to slide this thing in the back of your backpack, does make a wee bit of a difference, but at least it's protected, right? Well, then you think, that hard case, even though it's hard, it's still got a wee bit of give in it because that's just the way they're designed, and because the buttons protrude, it means that the knobs are going to take, sorry, not the buttons, the knobs are going to take all of the pressure of any impact. So you begin to worry about that and you think, well, maybe if they're pressing on the knobs all the time, like in my bag, that'll be bad. So you get a deck saver. and you put the deck saver on the OP1 like so, and then it's in there and it's fine. Even if you press down, it's not going to destroy it. The edges of the case take all of the pressure away. But then you read that actually some of these cases, these hard cases, the fur lining, the ink or the dye or whatever they use on them starts to come off, and you're like, well, I didn't pay 1,200 quid for a bloody thing. So it gets all marked with black ink. So you get a nice wee cover, or a wee, I don't know, whatever this was, I got it in Japan, covered the lens, and you wrap up your OP1 and you put it inside the case, and then you do this. But now what happens, this isn't portable. It might not be all that big, but it's definitely a bit heavier. And every time you want to use it, you have to open the case, you have to unwrap the OP1, you have to take the deck saver out. And it's just so many different barriers if you want to make music or if you want to then put it away. This means that if you're sitting on a train and you've got a 10-minute journey, or let's say you're sitting in an airport and you're waiting for your flight to be called and you don't know how long you've got, you're much less likely to pull out your OP1 and start making music on it, because by the time you do, you don't know if you're going to have to put it all back together again very quickly as the train pulls into the station, or if your flight gets called and you need to run like a maniac to the front of the queue just so you can get on the plane quicker. And because of that, even though the OP1 is portable in one sense, it's not got a great sense of portability like the OPZ. The OPZ doesn't have sticky out knobs that you worry about getting caught, apart from that ludicrous volume knob, which we'll talk about another time. But even with just the kind of weird, flimsy day glow thing that you get from Teenage Engineering, which looks like it's been cut out of an airport or an airplane life jacket, even with that, the OPZ feels fine. I can chuck that in my bag and I'm not worried about it getting destroyed. And so because of that fact alone, the OPZ is so much more portable than the OP1, and it's easily the most fully featured, most portable bit of music equipment I've got. And I use it, I take it everywhere now because of that, because I don't need to think about it. So that's one of its biggest strengths. The second thing that I love about the OPZ is just the whole process of making music on it. So on one hand, if you just have a few minutes, or if you've got like 10 minutes, or you don't really know what you want to do, you can quite easily just sit down, program in a really basic step sequence and experiment with that. You don't have to do anything grand, you don't have to go through a whole complicated procedure to start making a song. It's really easy and intuitive. On the other hand, it's also deceptively deep and powerful. So there are lots of features in here that once you get to know it, you get access to a whole bunch of parameters that you might not expect. There's LFOs, there's different kinds of effects. Each pattern can be a different length. So unlike a lot of other hardware sequencers, you can do polyrhythmical stuff. You can also sequence the effects so that it's kind of like a pocket operator where you can live punch in effects, but you can sequence them in this, and it's just such an immediate, fun way to make music that the portability plus the actual process of creation in this thing is just brilliant together. The third thing I really like about the OPZ is the way they've kind of addressed visual implementation. Now, as you'll see, there's no screen on here, unlike the OP1, and that was something that really put me off the OPZ in the first place, because I need some kind of visual cue more than just coloured lights or whatever to know what I'm doing, and I didn't really like the idea that I would have to memorise lots of button combinations to get to different functions and parameters. And whilst that is still kind of a bit of an issue with the OPZ, the way that Teenage Engineering sought to address this was by creating a second companion app. So initially it was just on iOS, but now it's on Android and Mac. But basically the idea is that you connect the OPZ up over Bluetooth to your mobile or to your laptop, and you can get a visual representation of what's going on the screen, kind of like the OP1 with all its quirky animations and stuff. You can see what's happening in quite a nice way. However, that's not what I'm concerned about, because Teenage Engineering have gone above and beyond just replicating or demonstrating what's actually happening on the device, and gone a step further into the world of kind of visual display and visual controls
By that I mean that there's a bunch of options in there that allow you to control different kind of visuals from the OPZ, and you can also sequence them in time with the music, which is amazing. And this is something that as an electronic musician I always feel we kind of lack a bit in comparison to like a live band, where there's a whole visual spectacle for people to connect the music with. And we need to think much harder about how we, you know, you don't want to be someone that you go and see playing like a DJ set or like playing a live gig and they just stand there with their device or they stand there with their laptop and there's no connection between what they're doing and the sound that's coming out. And I think that there needs to be, or I'm really interested in devices that kind of tackle that kind of problem or that question and give people connected ways to create more visual interaction between their performance and what's going on. In terms of how they've done it, you can basically, as I mentioned, you can sequence things, you can also play it live. There's a whole bunch of visual packs that you download. They're kind of vector animations, but you can also upload videos into the app itself and control them and manipulate them to a certain extent. For example, zooming in, zooming out. And it's got limitations, which I'll talk about in a bit, but the fact that they've included this is something that I really like. The final thing that I want to highlight that I really like about the OPZ is the expandability, or at least the theory of expandability. Now, when you get your OPZ, on the top here, there are 4 wee dunts, or whatever you want to call it, 4 holes that are plugged up with plastic, and you might not think much about them at the time, but basically, the whole idea is that you can remove the back of the OPZ quite easily and you can slide in modules that Teenage Engineering have come out with to expand the feature set. For example, one of the most common expansions is the OpLab module, I think, and it allows you to have like a physical MIDI in and out or a sync in and out and CV gate or CV and gate. I can't really remember because I don't have it, but it allows you to add on that functionality which isn't, you know, in the box when you buy it. The one that I've got in here, which might sound ridiculous, is the Rumble Pack. Now this basically is what it sounds like. It's kind of like a PlayStation controller in the sense that the bass frequencies resonate or rumble the device whilst you're using it. And yes, that may sound completely pointless, but I can tell you that the experience of using that with headphones in and the bass rumbling in your hands is just fantastic, and it's such a cool idea. The only problem, of course, is that it costs a lot of money, so if you can find one secondhand, that's good. So what are the things that I don't love about the OPZ? Well, there's a few that need consideration, to be honest. First of all, the back. I don't know if you can hear this, but the back just isn't very secure. It's quite rattly, and part of the reason for that is because these wee things here aren't actually screws, even though they look like screws. They're kind of bayonet fastenings, I guess, so that you can quite easily and quickly open the back, I guess, to swap out, you know, the module. But it seems a bit strange because they're not tight enough, and so when you're using it, you can feel it rattle, and it just doesn't feel all that premium or all that secure or nice to use. And I get why they did it, but people aren't going to be switching out their modules all the time. They might do it, you know, regularly, but they're not going to be doing it every day or like every hour to the extent that they need such a loose, secure connection in the back. So that's a shame, and I wish they'd found a better way of securing it, because it doesn't feel very good at all. The second thing I don't like is the Bluetooth implementation. For whatever reason on OS X, when you try and connect the OPZ to Mac, you can't do it via the regular Bluetooth connection. You have to go into Audio MIDI setup and do it there. This is a problem with some other Bluetooth MIDI devices and Mac itself, but it's just a pain in the arse because every time you load up the app, you have to go in and manually reconnect it. And this isn't just something that I've experienced, it is apparently a problem. And I don't know whether it's a Teenage Engineering design problem or whether it's like a wider Bluetooth MIDI thing, but it is a pain in the arse and I don't like it. The third thing that I don't love about the OPZ is in relation to the video control mode. So whilst I like or even love the fact that you can control different visuals using the OPZ, it's just too complicated to create your own visuals. And so that means that you're kind of limited to the displays that you can actually make use of. Whilst there are a bunch of cool packs out there that you can buy, the engine or the kind of architecture that Teenage Engineering have chosen for people to create their visuals in, I think is called Unity. And it's not the most common or the most easy for a beginner to get involved in and make their own packs. For example, I mean, I'm quite a technical person, but for me, this, even looking at this, was like learning a whole other skill set, which I just don't have the time or the mental capacity to sink loads of resources and loads of hours into learning a wholly new thing just to create a couple of new visuals for the OPZ. And so I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the alternative would have been, and I get that they were providing tools for people to make really impressive bits of visuals with, but it is a shame that there isn't a more accessible way for people to get into the creation of visuals, because I think that would really open things up in terms of what you could do with the device. So yeah, controlling visuals is cool, but having more accessibility to that would be great. Linked to the visual display stuff, there's also an option in here for the OPZ to control a DMX lighting rig. And in theory, that means that much like you could control visuals in time with the music, you could also take your own lights to a venue or in your studio and control them with OPZ. And in some ways I love this as well, because I love the idea that such a wee tiny device could open doors to allow you to control things in a way which you might not otherwise be able to. But I also think it's a bit of a strange addition, because it does take up one of the full tracks on here, and I'm not really sure who's going to be using that. If you understand DMX Lighting and you're using it already, then you're going to have a better, more fully featured controller for that purpose. And if you don't use DMX Lighting, you're obviously a size where I just can't imagine the scenario where you turn up at a venue with your lighting rig if you're doing smaller gigs. And I can't imagine the scenario where you're a bigger artist and you would be writing a set or controlling lights with this. So whilst it's a really cool idea and it allows for creativity, I'm just not convinced about the people that would actually be using this, or how useful it is in practice versus it just being a cool idea. The final thing that I don't love about the OPZ is the fact that there's no way to export stems of your patterns. Now in the OP1 you have your 4 tracks of your tape, you plug it in your computer, you take the different tracks off, and that gives you some possibility to process the individual tracks separately in your DAW, which makes the songs much more release ready. But in the OPZ you can't do that. You can only really record out. And whilst I kind of got into that in the overall summation, it does limit what you do with the OPZ to some extent. So I wish there was an option there for you to render the stems down, maybe of your performance, for example, or even just the patterns themselves, because it would make it so much more, it would take it up a level from being a musical toy into like a musical production bit of gear. So that's a shame. One thing I should probably expand on a bit is the question of how intuitive the thing is to use, because whilst it is quite easy to get up and running and make music, it isn't necessarily easy to remember how to access all the different parameters that the device has to offer. So for example, if you want to get to the LFO speed, you have to remember what colour LED corresponds to the page that has the LFO values on them. And then you have to remember which knob corresponds to which LFO attribute. And the same thing is true for all the kind of secondary functions like, I don't know, effects depth and effects rate and type of effect and stuff. So if you're the kind of person that wants to make very deliberate choices all of the time about things you're doing, this isn't necessarily going to be, I mean, it's not set up for that kind of workflow. And whilst you can have kind of happy accidents, sometimes you do want to know, okay, I want to increase the volume of this particular thing, and that isn't always easy. You can, of course, fire up the app and see what each parameter is doing as you're changing things, and that can be a good way to learn how things work at the outset, but you don't want to have to do that all the time. And if you're not using the OPZ every day, or maybe you don't use it for a week or so, you can quite quickly forget what each colour maps to, or which each button combination maps to. And so, whilst I don't think it's been a huge issue for me in practice, it is something that isn't ideal, and it takes a wee bit of relearning every time you use it. Maybe over time though, it'll become, especially if you're using this device as one of your main music making things, then that'll become less of an issue, but it's something to be aware of. The bottom line about the OPZ for me is that it's extremely portable and I can take it anywhere. It's got enough features in there and is fun enough to use that I could happily take this away on holiday for a month and not worry about getting bored. It's also got the ability to have 10 different projects in there with 16 patterns each. And if you compare and contrast that to the OP1, where if I wanted to take that away, I'd really have to have access to a computer to dump the various tracks off because of the 6-minute limit that it's got. And so this is one of my favourite bits of music making gear I've used in a long time. If you're purely looking for something to sequence other bits of gear, or as like an actual music production tool that will finish songs that you can release, this is probably not for you. So that's it. Hopefully that would have been useful to somebody if you're interested in the OPZ, and if not, then thanks for watching it anyway and bumping up my YouTube stats. See you later.